we're not trying to recreate the wheel. If our detection engine can detect it, which it can detect a whole lot of things, we're not necessarily interested in spending our time and subsequently our customers' time hunting for those things that our engine is already hunting for. We're hunting for things that fall inside more of that gray area where we really can't tell, okay, is this an actual threat without that deep dive human analysis? It might not trigger those detection mechanisms, but we can look to see, does this look weird? We might not be able to publish a threat as a result of this threat hunt, but we can reach out to our customers and ask, hey, what's going on here? It looks a little odd. And maybe it's just an opportunity to clean up some cyber hygiene, or maybe it is something that they want to correct in their environment.
All right, we're at the top of the hour. We've got a bunch of stuff going on today. And so we're going to start off with some stuff from the news before we do the rest of our, actually, let's just do the introductions right now. Bree, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Bree Barbaro. I am one of the managers of our threat hunting team here at Red Canary. Been here about 4 years, and prior to diving into the threat hunting space, I was working as a consultant doing a wide variety of cybersecurity consulting. My favorites included insider threat program build and incident response program build and plan writing.
Outstanding. Insider threat response. We need to have a whole session on that.
Oh, I'm happy to talk about it. I can nerd out on that anytime.
Fantastic. It's good to have you on, Bree. And I can tell everyone I had the opportunity to spend some time talking with Bree at RSA earlier this year, and it's got a lot of really great insights. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say today. Brittany, please introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, nice to meet everybody. I'm one of the threat hunters here at Red Canary. I've been here about 2 years and just really passionate about threat hunting. Been doing it for about 6 years. Before coming here, I was doing it in a consulting space, so getting to really help build some programs, and really excited to get to talk to you about it today.
It's great to have you on. Thanks for making the time. And rounding out, Chris, would you yourself?
Sort of hidden off screen here. There we go. My scene is live according to Zoom. I am a senior information security researcher here at Red Canary, a part of the community team. Only been here since March, but long time listener, first time caller.
Right on. Welcome to the party. Chris and I are going to talk about the news first, and then we're going to bring Bree and Brittany back to talk about a beginner's guide to threat hunting. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. Chris, why don't you kick off with your thoughts on the Crimson Collective?
Yeah, this is sort of just a follow-up news story to what you and Keith talked about last week. That Red Hat repo raid story. This slide kind of boils down some news from a pretty good blog from Rapid7. And if you want to go to the blog, I'm sure we can post it in the chat here. It's got IOCs and all that caches and all that kind of fun stuff. But it's all about this Crimson Collective group, and I guess apparently what they're shifting their attention to now. So after stealing the repos from Red Hat, they are compromising long-term access keys, leveraging privileges attached to identity and access management accounts, and then using TruffleHog to find leaked AWS credentials. Sort of taking those credentials, using APIs to return details on those accounts, figuring out which ones are real and which ones aren't. And then once they find out that they have the real accounts, they can establish persistence, create passwords, access keys, all that kind of fun stuff. I was doing some
reading around this in preparation for this, and TruffleHog's a super interesting product that looks not just at what's in your repos now, but what's in your commit histories, right? And I'm curious for the folks on the call, I'd love to hear in the chat, how many of you, when your organizations find that creds have been committed into GitHub or something like that, it's one thing to take them out of the source code, but I'm curious how many of your incident response playbooks involve actually rotating those keys and recognizing that they are out in the wild forever once they're in the commit logs. So drop a note in the channel if that's part of your playbook. I'm curious to see how prevalent that is. Back to you, Chris.
Yeah, I'd be curious. They also, I know AWS has a tool called Cloud Trail, which can be used for this kind of thing, like kind of tracking footprints and that kind of thing. But curious if folks are using that as well. Sort of the other story here is that they have kind of joining forces with a bunch of these other sort of extortion as a service teams, you know, like Lapsus, Scattered Spider, Shiny Hunters. I feel like they're all getting kind of hard to keep track of because there's so many of them, and they're all sort of doing the same tactics, victims. They're all communicating on Telegram, that kind of thing. They have a blog where they victim shame. It's a little suspect, but I mean, I feel like, and I'm sure Bree and Brittany can talk to this later. It's sort of the same things that like ransomware as a service groups have been doing for years, like Maze, like REvil, Darkside, Conti, that kind of thing. Anyway, that's that.
So, you know, as I'm reading through that blog, it seems like they're pretty noisy, right? Like their first step is to look to create a new user, which is a pretty simple thing to detect on. If your environment is locked down so that creating new users is really tightly controlled. Like we've been very careful here, Red Canary, to federate all of our identities. We have virtually zero human accounts in our cloud environments anymore. And so it is a deliberate thing when a new user is created, and it lights up our dashboards. And I'm curious how many folks have a strong signal there for detecting this type of behavior.
I'm going to editorialize a little bit here too. I think these are basically not the most refined cyber criminals. You know, these guys are still like kids. You know, like these are like late teens, early 20s kids. So,
right on. The other sad thing that I discovered in this, and I had not recognized this before, is that there is actually a primitive in AWS to allow you to change the master database password on an RDS database. I have always, as I've managed RDS databases inside the AWS environment, logged in to the server itself to manage credentials. And like, if you can do that from the AWS control plane, that just kind of makes me sad. Feels to me like that should set off all the alarms.
do you want to talk about more of this, the next slide here, which is this?
Yeah, let's move on. But I see Bree in the background nodding. I think we can hear you. Bree, do you have a comment about that? You look just sad.
No, I was just sharing your kind of alarm or disappointment at things that can be done that probably shouldn't be able to be done.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Why do we even have that lever?
Yep.
All right.
If you've got it, somebody's going to pull it. So
that's right. Yep. Why do we even have that lever? All right. For those of you that play the quote game, pay attention. All right. In the news, we also had the 13-year-old Redis vulnerability found. What are your thoughts on this, Chris? Because I have some thoughts about this.
I think I saw your thoughts, and I have a feeling I know what you're going to say. But part of this is sort of just like that the numbers just sort of scream out like marketing. I know you have a vulnerability and you have to, you know, disclose it. But part of it's sort of like, it's 13 years old and it's 75% of all cloud services are vulnerable, you know, and then 330,000 old databases are exposed to it on the internet. You know, I'm sure they just went to what's the site where you can go to and just punch up all those numbers. And it's part of it's a little, it seems a little alarmist to me, and it's not. Oh, so it's CVSS 10.0. It's you know, I don't know. It's not as bad. Is this correct?
Right. You know, so like this getting dragged for shipping Redis containers with no authentication. Like a lot of containers that I get with services are not, they have no default authentication. That's part of the deployment process, is setting that up, right? So there's a shared responsibility between the people using the technology and the people generating the technology that feels a little bit unclear in this conversation. But like if the conditions for this being a 9.9 or a 10 are that you have to have parked your Redis publicly on the internet, I would maintain you may have bigger problems than getting that box popped.
Mm.
And so, like, as we've gone through and looked, in our environment, you look and say, in order to get in a position to fire off a Lua sandbox escape and an RC on the machine, you're already in such a privileged position to fire that off that you don't. It basically becomes sort of a party trick at that point. Now, people that are parking their Redises on the internet probably are going to have a bad day regardless of this. So, I was talking with my friend over there who's the new CISO there. And his take was that this, in their thinking, is revealing some of the limitations of the CVSS 3.0 scoring rubric. And according to that rubric, it does come out that way. And so I think we're going to queue up in a future session here a look in a conversation around CVSS 3.0. I haven't spent enough time with it to have an opinion about where I think that's gone wrong. But one of the things was interesting to me. I believe that if you scored it against CVSS 2.0, it was a much lower severity. And I'd be curious as to how that worked out.
Yeah, it would be great to hear a conversation with you guys about vulnerability management and CVSS future. So November, sounds good.
All right. Anything else you want to share about the risk vulnerability before we get to the meat of the day today?
I'd say get going on the threat hunting party here. We'll slowly recede into the darkness here.
Thanks for joining, Chris. For those of you wondering why we're kicking Chris off and didn't have Bree and Brittany on here earlier, we only have room for 3 presenters on the screen at one time. And so we're having to take turns, but welcome to the party, Bree and Brittany. And I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about cyber pursuits, chasing shadows.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having us, Dave and Chris. We really appreciate the time. And little bit of backstory. Threat hunting at Red Canary is, in the grand scheme of things, something we've been doing for a really long time, and something we've had a team whose name shows that we're doing it for a lot shorter period of time. So it was, I think, 3 years ago, we rebranded our incident handling team to have a more proactive focus on threat hunting, and taking a team that was partially doing threat hunting and doing a lot of reactive work with customers during incidents to a team that is as effectively proactively looking through all of our customers' environments for threats that our detection engine hasn't yet been able to detect has been a journey. And so today we wanted to kind of chat through some of the most important lessons we've learned. Brittany's been incredibly instrumental through this journey, bringing all of her expertise and knowledge. And so I'm going to turn it over to her. I might chime in with some like management perspectives from here or there, but otherwise I'm going to turn it over to her to dive into why we're here today.
Awesome. Before we jump to that, I want to touch on something you just said about threat hunting, looking for threats in the environment that our engine has not been able to detect yet. I would imagine that's because it's something, there are things like there are IOCs that have landed but have not fired off yet. And so there hasn't been actual activity to detect, but the preconditions are there. Is that?
So it could be that. It could be a new or emerging threat that's coming through and maybe would evade more conventional detection mechanisms. There could be opportunities that we catch at one point in the attack chain, and threat hunters realize that we can threat hunt for certain behavior and see if we can detect it even earlier. So there's a variety of different elements to that. Mostly I say that to really highlight the fact that we're not trying to recreate the wheel. If our detection engine can detect it, which it can detect a whole lot of things, we're not necessarily interested in spending our time and subsequently our customers' time hunting for those things that our engine is already hunting for. We're hunting for things that fall inside more of that gray area where we really can't tell, okay, is this an actual threat without that deep dive human analysis? It might not trigger those detection mechanisms, but we can look to see, does this look weird? We might not be able to publish a threat as a result of this threat hunt, but we can reach out to our customers and ask, hey, what's going on here? It looks a little odd. And maybe it's just an opportunity to clean up some cyber hygiene. or maybe it is something that they want to correct in their environment.
Cool. All right.
I think that's a perfect lead in into our next slide too, more about threat hunting. So as Bree and Dave have already kind of touched on, there is a little bit of a difference between detection and threat hunting. And really the challenge is, we have adversaries who like to be stealthy and try and hide. There's also the unknown things, like we just talked about, kind of the Redis vulnerability that has been around for 13 years, right? There's some things that we just don't know are threats yet. Or there are things that just kind of blend in or lower kind of signal to level of noise. So what threat hunting does is kind of gives us a different perspective of, instead of waiting for some alert or waiting for a signal, we're proactively trying to think like the adversaries, coming up with hypotheses of, hey, if I was an attacker or if something bad was going on in my environment, what would it be? And how can I go out there and find it? So it's kind of that proactive, iterative approach of searching for it instead of waiting for something to happen. So it really helps with kind of identifying those things that are harder to detect, whether that's, sometimes you'll see admin activity or adversary activity that kind of looks like admin activity, right? Some of those recon commands you might see, or obfuscated PowerShell, or some of those things might just be an admin, so it's hard to detect. But with threat hunting, because you're looking across the environment, maybe aggregating things together and have this really structured hypothesis of what you're looking for, you can kind of find some of those unknowns or those threats earlier on in the attack chain or just before they're known. So I don't know, Bree, if you want to add anything here. I know you kind of touched on it before.
Yeah. I mean, supporting everything you've shared, really want to highlight kind of the first bullet point on here, if you will, or first comment is adversaries loving the dark. There may be elements of your environment that you don't necessarily have the greatest amount of visibility into. Maybe you don't have, if you have an MDR provider, Red Canary, for example, and you don't have an EDR sensor on a certain part of your network, and then you're unable to not only get the EDR protections and visibility, but you're also unable to get that MDR. Things like that are where adversaries are going to thrive. Adversaries also love chaos. So if you don't know kind of from a predictable perspective what's going on in your environment, you don't know how things are supposed to be structured, or you allow a wide variety of deviations from standard procedure, that's when some of the threat hunting techniques that we're talking about today are going to come in handy, because we're going to shed light on those darker areas of your environment, and we're going to help you make sense of the chaos.
Sounds good.
The perfect segue into our next slide that kind of talks about some of those core components, or how you can, help have more visibility or make threat hunting more successful. So as Bree mentioned, one of the challenges is that visibility, right? So you kind of need the data to detect things, right? If you don't have the data or the artifacts that an adversary might leave behind, you're not going to see the events or find that malicious behavior. So really kind of keying in on what's important in the environment, what data sources help provide that visibility that you need, and really focusing more on quality data opposed to quantity. So, here at Red Canary, we use a lot of like endpoint telemetry, cloud data, identity data, but those things that help us have the context and be able to identify those suspicious activities. So kind of focusing on that and making sure we could see things if an adversary did take any action. The next piece, go ahead.
So in those environments, when we don't have something like an EDR sensor on an endpoint, like how do we tackle shining light into those corners? Like, what options do people have in those situations?
That's very good, good question. So I think understanding first the environment and kind of understanding where those blind spots are. There's always kind of that trade-off of getting visibility and getting data. So maybe it's being more strategic. Maybe it's putting more controls in if you don't have visibility. If you don't have, like, I guess OT environments, probably endpoint or EDR is not appropriate for all of those. But there's probably some other logging or data sources that you could look at, maybe, network traffic or net flow data, just identifying those gaps and seeing what your concerns are about that area and what logs would help you identify that, or what tooling and controls you can put in place. I don't know if you have anything to add, Bree.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to think through recommendations we've made for some of our customers that do have incidents and they do involve portions of their environment that are not covered. That's a lot of what we tell them is, hey, here's a suggestion of like maybe looking at network data, maybe looking at, okay, are there any covered endpoints or monitored endpoints that these devices that are uncovered have been reaching out to, trying to communicate with? Are we seeing anything there? We also have been able to help advise some of our customers of like, okay, if you know you're not going to have visibility into this device because the logs are lacking and we can't have monitoring on it, can you put it behind a device that you do have monitoring for? Can you kind of make sure that the only way to get to it is through something that you do have a lot more visibility and control over to help increase that visibility, even if you know that's always going to be a blind spot right there.
And we find that the EDR tool sensors themselves provide enough telemetry or access to actually do the threat hunting, or do you need to deploy stuff like OS query in order to really do the job?
I think it's going to depend. I'll let Brittany answer, but from my perspective, I think it depends on what we're hunting for. So on our team, we understand that we don't have visibility into every bit of data that our customers do, right? We have a subset of data that we know we can hunt for certain things. And if we know it's outside of our visibility, for example, if you would need some of those log sources that we don't have access to, that's where we come in more of an advisory perspective and help guide our customers for how to hunt in that data themselves.
Yeah, I think you said it the best, Brie. It's kind of understanding what our approach is and what we're looking for, and understanding what data helps us identify that behavior. So EDR telemetry is very rich, right? You have the process, you have network, file, you have a lot of different events. So it does provide a lot of context, but depending on what you're looking for, maybe if it's more application specific threat, you would probably want those application logs, right? Or like CI/CD pipeline type stuff. You might want your logs from, like GitHub or some of those other tools implemented in that pipeline to have more context. But really it comes into, we'll talk about it, I think, on the next slide of that process. And as part of that, as you're coming up with what you're hunting for, also identifying what data is needed to really have enough visibility to make a determination on if that's present in the environment.
Right on.
I don't know if we want to go back and just quickly cover those other core components. And I guess we'll touch more on this too. I know I touched on it just a second ago, but that process too, right? Having a consistent approach to how you're hunting, it helps you to, have the results that you want, provides that guidance. So no matter what experience you have on the team, everybody can kind of follow the same approach to having hunts. So it kind of helps with that piece. And it also helps you to iterate and improve, right? If you have a process, you can see what's working, what's not, and improve over time, opposed to if you don't really have a process or structured way. You might have some wildly successful hunts because you have somebody who's very good at it, but they follow something that's, doesn't enable the other team members to kind of follow along, or not easy to reproduce. So that process has been really essential for our team here. The other consideration is really kind of tailoring your hunting to your organization, right? Like looking at what are those big concerns, because every industry or every company is a little bit different, right? A little bit different risks, a little bit different technology, probably some different goals or things that they see more as valuable assets that they want to protect. So really considering that too as you're hunting, what works for your organization. Do you have other teams within your security organization that hunting can collaborate with, right? There's probably some value integrating threat hunting with your intel team, or if you have a risk team, having those conversations and sharing information back and forth. And then leading kind of on the same line of having those success criteria is kind of what you want to achieve with your hunting program, so you know what your goals are and what you're working towards, so that you can have those consistent results. And like, threat hunting is there to help enhance your security, right? It's not its own function or design to be there. It's to help the business. So what are the goals and how does it work with the rest of the team? I don't know, Bree, if you want to add any thoughts here.
No, I think that about sums it up. And then if we want to move forward, I see that we got the 5-minute warning. So we talked a little bit about our process already, but to Brittany's point, making sure that you know exactly what data you do have access to as you're planning your hunt. You don't want to spend a ton of time planning an in-depth hunt, building a really in-depth hypothesis on pieces of information that you will never have access to. And so making sure that it's really targeted and pointed for what you do have access to. You focus your hunt appropriately, not too narrowly scoped, but not so broadly scoped that you're setting yourself up for failure.
Quick question.
Yeah.
When you have been in a customer environment mapping out and planning these hunts, and you realize you have a thesis that you want to go hunt for, and you don't have access to that data, has that been effective in helping that customer you were serving go get the resourcing they need to gather that telemetry? Like, is that a helpful business lever?
It can be. So typically our hunts that we do and kind of ideate on, we start from the perspective of hunting across our entire customer environment. So it's a little bit different than an individual organization's threat hunting program, where your only focus is what's happening in my org. We're looking at the threats that are likely to impact the broadest subset of our customers, and we narrow down from there. If we do find that we have suggestions for additional visibility that we don't have, but we want our customers to be able to access, we'll include those recommendations in our threat hunt reports of like, hey, we looked for this, we published results in your portal, but if you want to do continue to do research on this in your own environment, here are some logs and things you can look for within them.
I think another piece of this process that we found value in, and that I think kind of touched on with that data source piece, is being able to capture that knowledge too, right? So if you have findings where you realize you have gaps in visibility, or you don't have a data source, or recognize maybe a different data source would be better than the one you have, documenting those things and maybe working with the appropriate teams to improve those over time, right? So you kind of have that, you can enhance your overall security by tracking some of these observations you have from hunting, or even turning some of those hunts that are really good or higher fidelity into detections. There's a lot of good outcomes that can happen from that, but definitely, documenting it and capturing those details.
And given in the interest of time, we should probably pop through what are the key things we want to cover in the last couple of minutes.
Yeah, I think maybe we'll touch on a few challenges, so I won't read and go through all of these. But I think some of the pieces that have been hard for a lot of people in hunting is really drawing those conclusions out of the data. Sometimes you're hunting a little bit more broad, or you're getting a lot of data because you're hunting across an environment. So it might be too much noise, or you can't really make an interpretation of all of those results you get back. So really what we found helpful for those two challenges is really going back to your hypothesis and making sure it's well scoped, understanding exactly what behavior you're hunting for and why, and how you're going to approach it, so that you don't go down rabbit holes or don't know how to interpret things, but really kind of having that focus of what you're trying to find in your environment, as well as the more you hunt or the more you capture the information from your hunting, you get a better baseline or knowledge of your environment that then you can leverage in future hunts to make it easier to do that analysis with the different results. I think those are probably the big ones. Bree, I don't know if you wanted to, any of these particularly important to you, you wanted to talk about.
I think from a program build and from a management perspective, one of the biggest things that I felt like was a hurdle, like all of these were hurdles for us as we built our program, but for the unclear outcomes, value and impact not being understood, I had a lot of questions as a manager from our threat hunters as we were building this and building a really successful program of how do I know if it's successful? How do I know if I'm doing the right thing when I threat hunt? And so really having that clearly defined success criteria and communicating that with your team, making sure that you're not saying, oh, it's just number of hunts per month, because you can have a number of frankly not great threat hunts that you do. You also don't want to measure success and have KPIs in that are saying, okay, threats caught from a threat hunt, because you can get just as much value from a threat hunt that doesn't reveal any threats, but maybe reveals a detection opportunity, maybe reveals a visibility gap that you can then go fix. There's a lot of different lessons you can learn from a threat hunt, and making sure that your team is really clear that it's not a failure just because they don't find a threat is incredibly important for allowing that kind of curiosity, that creativity to flourish and blossom so you can really reap the rewards of a program like this.
Yeah, and in my perspective, when you're looking for specific bad behavior in an environment, an answer that comes back and says it's definitively not happening is actually a really positive result, right? So I think that is an important point to call out, is not finding something in a hunt does not mean the hunt failed. It might mean that you're actually doing fine.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to go a couple minutes long here. So we posted this poll on LinkedIn the other day. We're curious to hear what you guys think about this while you're voting on this. I want to cover the last slide. I'm going to hand it over to cover the last slide. There's some key takeaways that we want you to leave with this, and then we'll come back and see how you all think relative to what folks on LinkedIn responded.
I think for us, the key takeaways or kind of things you can do next is really continue to learn about your environment. If you have baselines, capturing them, or trying to learn them, because it makes it a lot easier to hunt or find those anomalies or things that are suspicious if you know what's normal. Also, threat hunting is a journey, right? Here at Red Canary, we've had a journey and we still continue to iterate on our threat hunting today. So really kind of starting small, start building up, iterate on things, find what works, the things that you can improve on, identifying those, and over time, moving forward and integrating them. Also, there's a lot of great open source resources that can help. Some of the challenges with hunting is identifying what to start hunting. So if you have a threat intel team or looking at threat blogs, looking at MITRE ATT&CK for some of the behaviors that adversaries use and focusing on hunting on those can also be very useful. And then just determining what your process is and documenting that out so you can have that repeatable and understand what the goals are and how you're going to be tracking these hunts or how you're going to be doing them. And then it's more of a mindset, right? We're, as threat hunters, want to go out and find what are these adversaries doing. So always trying to think through that and integrate it into our security program, not just being reactive, but trying to think ahead and find where we can identify some of the risks or threats.
That all makes sense. There was a question from the audience about how do you detect living off the land techniques? And my guess is that learning your environment about what looks normal in the environment is a key step in uncovering living off the land, right? Because the goal of living off the land is to blend in, right?
Exactly.
But for someone in your environment who doesn't know what the baseline looks like normally, they may be using the same tools, but maybe in a different pattern. It's hard to know that pattern when you're first in the environment. Is there anything else that you found helpful in identifying living off the land patterns?
I think that's the biggest thing is just having those baselines, and also when you're threat hunting, depending on the data you're collecting and looking at, sometimes it's easier to see because you're not just looking for one example, you're looking across your environment and you can kind of aggregate the data and stack it to filter out the ones that look odd and kind of investigate more of those to determine if it is suspicious.
Yep. Cool. Well, we got to wrap here in just a minute. The results of the poll here. Let's see. 11 to 25. It's like the biggest challenge is in determining the difference between malicious and normal behavior. Was the biggest risk we had, which is actually lower than, or sorry, different than what the LinkedIn crowd mentioned. Can everybody see the poll results? Is that showing on everybody's screen? I don't need to read the results to you if you guys can all see it. Yeah, it seems to me, that differentiating between malicious and normal behavior is super hard, right? And I don't know, like, how much of that false positives and malicious versus normal behavior differentiation feel very closely related. But yeah, those are tough problems. Any last words, Bree or Brittany, before we go? I'm stumbling over my tongue today.
No, I think given those answers, we could look at diving into a topic of how do you differentiate in your environment? How do you accurately baseline and help others figure out how to determine between malicious and normal?
Yeah, I think a discussion about how we actually do that from a practical standpoint would be a great conversation. I'd be super interested in hearing how we tackle that.
Awesome. Well, looking forward to seeing everyone for that then.
All right. Thank you, Brittany and Bree, for coming on. Fascinating topic. Thanks, Chris, for the news input. And thank you all for joining today. We'll look forward to talking with you next week. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks.